Kalimera Seolus, Kakalosa Irtates, Economica. Welcome everybody, good morning, welcome to Economica, all about economics and finance. And we are bang straight up very early in the morning. I woke up, I think it was 5 a.m., plenty of sunshine. And we have this marvelous UK inflation data, which are coming hot from the United States core inflation 2.9, inflation CPI 2.7. So we have a rising trend of inflation basket headlines. And we see here that the UK CPI year on year is 3.6, core inflation has jumped to 3.7, the inflation rate month on month is 0.3, core inflation 0.4, and RPI index is 4.4%. That's a nightmare for consumers and for the Bank of England, who could find very difficult to basically adjust cut interest rates. And I don't want to speculate about any yield curve reaction to that. So, what are we all about? So, as usual, that is very special content today. I will be honoring Sir William Shakespeare. I will be acting, and so you just be ready for my performance. And we will go through some slides. There will be no data today, but slides, models, some economic theory, and I'll try to do my best not to make too many mistakes. Okay, so 3, 2, 1, act. Mr. Speaker, we are here today to discuss about the recent inflation data that we have today, the cost of living of the British people. It's an unabated cost that constrains the prosperity of the British people, the hard-working British people. And we are very concerned about our allies. We want to impose tariffs on our exports. We are an island of merchants. We trade freely all over the world. We believe in free commerce, free trade. We don't impose tariffs of any barriers to the movements of goods, services, and especially human beings when it concerns to slavery. So we are a proud, free island, the British Isles, and on these shores. We import a lot of goods, and therefore this here we see that inflation is rising, is head up again, and that will be of a concern for all the British people. And I'm here today, Mr. Speaker, to explain what the government intends to do with regards to inflation, and how to explain what are the causes of inflation, what may be the corrective action that we could take. And so we see here that the cost of inflation the previous month was 0.2%. Inflation rate this month is 0.3%. We can make some simple assumption that inflation is a compounded cost. So it hurts the pound in the pocket of the British consumer, the hard-working British people. And so we can see that if we take £100, we multiply by 1 plus 0.002, which is the rate of inflation on the month of May alone, we will have this result, 100.2. That means that for the same £100, the British consumer, the proud British men and women of these islands, will have to pay £100 and 20 pennies to have the same purchasing power from one month to another. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, if we perform the same mathematical operation again, very simple arithmetic, we'll try to perform eventually, okay. Sorry, Mr. Speaker, I will follow through. So we perform the same arithmetic again, and we compound the cost of the month of June of 0.3% that the Chancellor has decided to impose upon the British people. There we see, with this reckless borrowing, we see that the compounded cost for 2 months of this reckless fiscal policy of the Chancellor of the Exchequer is going to cost 50 pennies for every £100 to the British people. And these are simple arithmetics that we have no idea whatsoever why the Chancellor of the day doesn't take into account. As the purchasing power of the pound of the hard-working people in the pocket that they earn with hard work, it's devalued month by month, quarter by quarter, year by year, and we don't understand why there is no decisive action in tackling the cost of inflation and the cost of living. Because at this rate, if we will compound 0.3% inflation for 12 months, we will have an annual 3.65% inflation, 3.66, which is well above the Bank of England price stability target imposed by this Chancellor of the Exchequer, 2%. And there will be no possibility to provide interest rate cuts for the economy to thrive. And we saw that our recent GDP data have showed us that GDP has been shrinking in the past 2 months, while the oblivion black hole that the Chancellor pretends it's pie in the sky. It's pie in the sky. The action of the Chancellor have decided to increase the cost for firms and businesses to go about the business every day to employ people, and we oppose decisively the decision of the Chancellor to have increased the costs for firms and businesses to operate. And we see the result in April and May. Immediately the GDP has declined, the aggregate output of the economy has declined, and at the same time we are having an inflationary effect. So effectively, Britain has been plunged in stagflation again. For the pleasure of our American allies, we are proudly stagnating again on our British Isles, thinking about Churchill, thinking about beautiful Marbella, thinking about Benidorm, and all the marvelous places in Europe where we could be on holiday, the marvelous places in Asia, far away from these British shores, which are made an unwelcoming place by this Chancellor, this government that stifles freedom of enterprise and business with their taxes and reckless borrowing. Sorry. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm here today to explain what we intend to do in order to make sure that the British people they can harvest the fruits of their hard work, and they can see an improvement in the prosperity of their lives and the future. The cost of living, we want to decrease the cost of living, but crucially, we want the British people to understand that this is no time for consumption. This is no time for reckless borrowing. This is no time for consumption. This is no time for gambling in the stock market. Your eyes are your savings shares. This is no time for borrowing excessive amount of money and buying overpriced properties, and you will find yourself in negative equity with an unpayable debt that this Chancellor wants to impose on the British people. He wants to wreck our economy for years to come. We cannot allow this to happen, Mr. Speaker. And we oppose decisively the fiscal and economic policy of this Chancellor that wants to borrow vast amounts of billions of pounds on the back of the British taxpayer, and at the same time invites the British taxpayer, the hardworking people of these islands, to gamble their savings in the stock market and to take reckless mortgages that could never be paid back. The Chancellor knows very well she's dancing at the tune of the Barclays CEO and of the banks who wants to carry their dirty business. And this security economics is just securitization. They want to flood the financial system with toxic product, mortgage-backed securities, securitize debt, and they want to cripple the global economy in an economic and financial crisis for the short-lived gain of their political gains, which will lead to nothing rather than what we see here, to stagflation, high inflation, high taxes, declining living standards, a country that is out of control. And the British people, they don't see any future for themselves in this country. We cannot allow this to happen, Mr. Speaker. And we are here today. I will explain that this is not time for borrowing. This is the time for the British people to understand how to best utilize their money, their own hard-earned money. What is the utility of their money? If it's more useful to consume their money in reckless takeaways, McDonald's bros in Liverpool, takeaways on Brighton Beach, cheap food, fat food, because you're all a bit fatty, innit? Rather than understand the value of money and how useful can be used those money, can be saved Savings provide capital for productive investment in the economy that will create jobs. It will allow small firms to find liquidity and to create businesses, and with that employment will be created, with wages will be created. So what is the utility of having a wage? And if it's more useful to upgrade my house, to install solar panel on your house, the cat says no. We will not allow, Mr. Speaker, anymore this fat cat fiscal policy, these revolving doors, because people are strange. They are strange. People are strange. Through these revolving doors, they are dancing at the tunes of the banks for their reckless gambling. And so, Mr. Speaker, what is the utility of money? The British people, they should well utilize their earned wages not for consumption, but for investments, for the utility, the marginal utility of their money, or their pound in their pocket, to upgrade, to invest, to research, to invest in technology, to upgrade their houses for productive use, for those who are so brave on the British and Irish shores, to install solar panel in islands which are not blessed by sun all year. But we saw that with climate change, we have this very hot summer. And Mr. Speaker, it is evident that I had way too much sun on my head lately. But nevertheless, we know that the economy and the hard work of the British people can be expressed and explained with the post-Keynesian economics of the short-run aggregate supply equation that we have here. The short-run aggregate supply equation, it tells us that for pi of t, the expectation of pi of t plus 1, so the expectation of inflation plus lambda, which is the parameter for the speed of convergence of the expectation of inflation, it multiplies to the output gap plus some epsilon error terms, white noise terms. I'm a white noise. I'm a white guy, a wise guy. Well, that means that the output gap, so the amount of production that these islands can carry forward through the world with all the Commonwealth territories, is directly constrained, or it's directly linked to inflation expectations. And in the moment that inflation expectation will rise, those will influence, those will change the outcome, the output of the output gap, the output of the equation. So for sticky prices, the firms, they cannot, we have seen that we have high inflation. So we have a condition in our economy where we have sticky prices, and firms, they cannot adjust rapidly. We have been in stagnation for many months and years. So it means that British business, they are finding difficult to adjust to sticky prices, to high prices. And this determines as a direct consequence the stagnation of the economy and higher inflation expectation. But on top of that, the Chancellor decided to hike national insurance contribution for employers to 15% for their reckless borrowing and spending without any control on the credit card of the British taxpayer for their lavish lifestyle. And what do we got in return? Nothing. Economic recession, stagnation, high inflation, and real wages will not grow enough to keep up with inflation. It's a disaster, Mr. Speaker. We cannot allow that to happen. We cannot allow that to carry on anymore. And we see that the economy is a dynamic engine of our island, which is made by our proud British people. And we know that we have pi of t equals beta times the expectation of inflation plus a k parameter, which is a Calvo parameter, which defines the stickiness of price. The aggregate supply curve, how steep it can be. Well, we can have a flat aggregate supply curve, short-run aggregate supply curve, or it can steepen, but it depends by this Calvo bold parameter, for those who have not so many errors, that calculates the stickiness of prices and the difficulty of firms and households to adjust to sticky prices, which don't decline, but they only increase up and up and up. We have higher and higher prices for less and less. And the big conundrum of our British economy is that we pay higher and higher prices, but productivity doesn't move. So that clearly defines how the British economy, it's a rentier's economy. So we have oligopolies in the housing sector, in the oil industries, which are able to change prices not only for a cost push effect, sort of a rising cost of production, they are forced to increase prices and pass it to the consumer. But we see that they increase prices willy-nilly for mere profit, for greed, and because of their oligopolistic position in the market. And those are at the expenses of the British taxpayer, which are the victims of the invasion of the American multinational on these island shores, which have wrecked our economic system made of small businesses and merchants and family shops, corner shops in the local community, which are the backbone of a healthy and happy society. We are becoming an anonymous society, an individualistic society, a digital society, a society who does self-checkouts. There is no communication, there is no empathy, there is just the shopping, the amorphous, meaningless shopping of items, this reckless consumption of the British pound, which brings no utility, it brings no investment, it brings no progress, and it extracts the wealth of the British people towards multinationals, which drain our savings. And we have a rentier society. So the oligarchy of the landlords extract the rents from our British people without giving them any shelter, which is a decent home. And we see that the British people, they work harder and harder every day. They care about their families, they go about their businesses, and they come back home with less and less and less, but just having wasted their time in hard work without any reward whatsoever. And often, Mr. Speaker, this hard work, as of studying new Keynesian economics, is not rewarded at all. The academics, they are estranged, they are mistreated in our society, the so-called experts. You should not listen to experts. But it's all in front of our eyes. This Majesty of formula, mathematical formula, describes how the aggregate supply adjusts to inflation expectation, to a K parameter which describes the stickiness of prices and the difficulty of businesses to adjust to costs and the stickiness of prices, which in turn basically interacts with the output gap. The output gap is the GDP. It's what the British people produce and they can keep for themselves, for their progress, for their wealth, for their well-being. So the more inflation expectation will rise, then we will have a negative output gap that will continue to keep our island in stagnation. And we will see the British people paying their rents to rentiers, to the billionaires of Qatar and the UAE, which without any morality, they show their wealth. They have a show up of their wealth, their immoral wealth, just big houses, big cars, and they have slaves working for them, cleaners, nannies, and their immorality, which has no comparison with the ordinary middle class in Britain, the free entrepreneurs, the hard-working people, our businesses, our entrepreneurs, the immorality of those who come from the Middle East and launder their money on our islands, showing off their wealth, imposing their religion on our island, and imposing their costumes, which we do not abide to them at all. This island is ours. It's of the British people, it's of the English people, it's of the Scottish people, it's of the Welsh people, it's of the Northern Irish people, it's of the island of Jersey, it's the Cornish people, the proud men and women of this island. They cannot be, never will be subjected to the immoral rule of the emirs of the Middle East. We will not allow, we have one king, he's our king, His Majesty. We don't take orders from anybody else. And so the immorality of these high prices that constrain and that they push property prices to sky-high levels, and those houses are no longer affordable for our people, and they are forced into long-term slavery, in long-term rent, and they run away, they go into Thailand, they go to Asia, where they find paradise. They find beautiful islands, beautiful seas, beautiful food for affordable living. And they have no constraints from this immoral, exaggerated wealth and this immorality that comes from the Middle East. This exaggerated wealth concentrated to this Qatar and Dubai sheikhs, while millions of people in the Middle East are struggling to famine. They are struggling to survive. That's totally immoral. The British state should never, ever, ever accept this kind of immorality on its lands, on its shores. We are a proud nation. We are the proud nation of football. We believe in fair play, and everyone can have same and equal opportunities. And we have one king. We never allow that anybody that come from the Middle East monarchy, they would impose their immoral lifestyle on our shores at the detriment of our people. We have extraction of wealth in terms of rents, this oligarchy of landlords on our islands. And we see that the households and the firms, they are constrained by the expectation of inflation, and they have to choose from consumption and leisure time, and that their trade-off basically is measured by the wage labor, what they receive, the rental rate of capital, plus the depreciation rate of capital. So our people, they work very hard and they earn a wage, and eventually they should be able to save. But we see that most of the time people are not able to save because house prices are very high, asset prices are too high, our economy is stagnating under an unsustainable inflation cost, an unsustainable asset price cost, which extracts more and more wealth from our people. And to finance this immoral lifestyle of these Middle East oligarchies, which we don't condone at all. And so we see that the optimality conditions are the followings. As we have a discount parameter in beta, the expectation of inflation time t, which are what? The 1 over consumption at time t plus 1, times 1 plus the depreciation rate of capital. And that's the trade-off of the household, the optimality condition of households, which have to decide whether to consume or take leisure time. And these decisions, they are all constrained by the wage labor, the wage that they receive, the rental rate of capital, if they have an investment or they are able to invest their savings, and the depreciation rate of capital. And we will see that with inflation, the depreciation rate of capital, it's a larger proportion of this problem. And at the same time, we see that the firms has the same problem in adjusting their production. Firms have to experience the same cost of inflation. They have to decide how to maximize, optimize their production, which is the production. This machine, it works. Production is pi of t, as we see in this formula here. Pi of t is a proportion of the production function, the production input, minus the wage of labor and the rent of capital. Okay, and the firm is subject to a production function, which is a Cobb-Douglas production function, which says that the cost of capital to the power of some alpha parameter, which is the share of capital that we deploy in the economy. Sorry about that, I'm dealing with notebooks. And we have a factor which is a technology factor times L, which is the share of labor to the power of 1 minus alpha, which is the share of capital. So we see that the production function is subject to a constraint, not sort of constraint, but is subject to what? To another function, which is that the output, y of t, equals a k parameter, so the capital, to the power alpha, so the share of capital. The share of capital works with a technology factor that multiplies the labor productivity factor to the power of 1 minus alpha, which is the share of capital. So we see that the firm, any business, small, large, or medium business, needs technology to improve its output, to progress, to produce more, to improve productivity, to make possible that British people can make most of the work with a minimal effort, without being slave. Okay, so we know that the technology factor evolves by a factor rho, and it's a regressive factor, so technology is implemented and then it acts, it diffuses with a lag in the economy. So any discovery, it needs to be tested in order to be effectively utilized for improving productivity. So any technological improvements acts with a lag in the economy, and that's, we can see here, t minus 1 plus e of t, okay, where rho is a parameter capturing the persistence of technological progress. So what is the utility of the pound in the pocket of the British people is exactly the technological progress that we have to pursue on our islands. We cannot be a nation of consumer, but we must be a conscious nation of hardworking people who think carefully to the utility of their hard-earned wages in order not to waste their money on the first McDonald's bro in Liverpool on a drive-in takeaway, to have a punch-up and a match-up with very fat McDonald's stuff because somebody just said, "You stupid bitch, stay in the queue," or something like that. So we cannot do that anymore, Mr. Speaker. We cannot have this trivial language among our people. Our people, they have to be educated. Education, 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 and they have to be conscious of the value of the money in their pocket and the best utility that they can extract for themselves and their families from those money. And so technology happens to be something that can improve the productivity of businesses, like having a computer, like the new discovery of AI, like the internet, like the fast broadband, the digital services, so forth and so on, that allow us to keep us in touch even at faraway distances, Mr. Speaker, so that we can have a digital economy that will be integrated in all our Commonwealth nations and all the British people around the world. They could participate in our economy. So today, Mr. Speaker, we announce a revolutionary for all of Commonwealth, so that more and more people can be productive and participate to the British economy, because the British way is the way of doing things, and we must teach that again to our people, our proud people. So I'm acting, so I'm pretty tired, but basically technology is what improves the output of businesses. Okay. And so we see that firms, the British businesses, and all the global businesses, they have an optimization problem. I have a problem now with my noteboard. Okay, I don't have a problem now anymore. So we have an optimization problem, which means that we have any business in the global economy has to optimize and maximize its output according to the share of labor, the wages, the cost of capital, and all the input costs that are the inflation cost for businesses. So we know that we have to maximize, we have to have max, not the credit card. We don't have to max out the credit card. For max, K&L, which is capital and labor, we have P, T, K, alpha T times the technological factor times the labor time T to the power of 1 minus alpha. I think I'll have to cut that. So the firms, they have the optimization issue, the optimization problem, which is this one. For this rate, they have to optimize for the share of wage labor to return on capital, and the technological factor, investment, technological factor of capital. And so businesses, they have to optimize their outputs according to the inflationary cost in the economy and the stickiness of prices and the expectation of inflation. So we know that the optimality condition for production are defined by this capital and labor ratio. So alpha 1 minus alpha is the share of capital times the wage labor at time t, which equals the rate of capital. So, and then market pricing under monopolistic competition. We don't want to have monopolists in our economy, Mr. Speaker. So we know, Mr. Speaker, that the firm, for what concerns the optimality condition for capital and labor, remember that the firm, any business production function, Cobb-Douglas function, it shows us that the output of any business equals A of T k to the power of alpha t L 1 1. We have a problem, Mr. Speaker. Hold on. 1 minus alpha. So that means that the production function derives from capital, labor, and the technology component. So the firm has also a cost minimization problem, so that the firm requires to have, unfortunately, for market forces, a minimal cost in the share of capital and labor, which means that the share of labor plus the rental rate of capital minus a constraint, which is, this constraint is exactly this equation here. The equation here is a t k to the power alpha, which is the share of capital t I t, and labor 1 minus alpha time I t minus y I t. That's the constraint that we have. So the firm has to minimize this cost, and we can solve that theoretically with a Lagrangian process. So we have a Lagrangian, which is this equation here, and then we know that R of t minus our constraining factor we set these equations to 0, Mr. Speaker, which is R of t, return of capital, and wage. So the cost of fund our business and the labor cost of our business, because labor is a cost to the British taxpayer. They don't have any business whatsoever rather than taxing and spending their way to the oblivion of a black hole that they have created by their own making, this fantasy economics black hole. So the firm has to minimize the cost, but how we can guarantee productivity and high wages? That's through technology, okay? But we know that the firm has to minimize the cost, and the firm has to absorb other marginal costs for operating the business. And among those marginal costs, there is the reckless decision of increasing the national insurance contribution employer to 15%. And I will show, Mr. Speaker, that this increase in taxation has exactly led to higher inflation expectation, and declining GDP and unemployment, because the firm, when there's a change in the marginal cost, it has to adjust. And so what happens if we have a sticky price component already, for which the businesses, they have to discount their production function, when also the share of labor becomes more expensive, our k, the cost of labor becomes more expensive, which is wage t times L, and the cost of capital becomes more expensive, then we have a marginal cost for the firm which goes up. And so we have, what happens is that the aggregate supply in the economy declines. So GDP declines, aggregate supply. The short-term curve of aggregate supply declines, and we have inflation expectation at time t plus 1 rising up. And at the same time, we have unemployment rising up, because the firm is forced into a choice of decreasing the amount of labor input, because they have a trade-off, which is between sticky prices, which is the theta component of the Calvo pricing, for the aggregate supply equation, which is this one, in a dynamic stochastic general equilibrium. So we have here, okay, so the equation here is pi hat of t, okay, it has a discount factor, the expectation of inflation at time t plus 1. So we have two problems which are compounding on each other, which are sticky prices, which is this K factor. Okay, I will tell you in a moment. So this K factor is nonetheless K equals 1 minus theta times 1 minus beta theta over theta. And the factor here is multiplied by what we see here in this equation, which is 1 plus the epsilon indexation of past inflation, alpha sigma minus 1 over alpha, and the output gap. The output gap, Mr. Speaker. So the British businesses, small, large, corner shop, they are faced with a tough choice of having to deal with this K parameter, which is the stickiness of prices, and the overall aggregate of the economy in a dynamic stochastic general equation on the supply function. So because instead of having a static model, we have a dynamic model that reflects more the behavior of producers and consumers in the economy. So whenever we have higher inflation expectation and we have a component of stickiness of prices, when the chancellor decides to increase the cost, the marginal cost of firm for hiring workers, for hiring people, and create jobs, that force the firm into a trade-off, and what we have is still higher inflation expectation because there is the cost, the compounding cost of the firm on top of the structural inflation cost. We have lower output because at that point this aggregate supply shrinks, and so we have declining GDP, and we see here the data, Mr. Speaker. We see here the data, Mr. Speaker. The numbers, the data are incontrovertible, Mr. Speaker. We have the past 2 months of declining growth, declining aggregate supply in production, so goods and services, which are directly consequence of what the Chancellor has forced into the economy, knowing perfectly well that we have higher inflation now than was before because of the Chancellor reckless borrowing and spending, and we have higher inflation, and at this pace retail prices are 4.4%. So we are encouraging the British people to consume rather than to think carefully about what they use with their pounds in their pockets. Instead of paying taxes and paying on a stealth tax of inflation, the British people, they should save and invest in technology and improve their businesses, the efficiency of their businesses, the efficiency of their output, and improve their living standards somehow. But now we will show exactly what is causing our economic decline for this reckless decision of increasing the marginal cost of production of business. We have the function here, the marginal cost equals 1 over 1 minus alpha, and there is the rate of technological progress times the wage and the rental rate of capital, the cost of capital. So the firm has to optimize for the cost of wage and the cost of funding itself. The rent of capital means that the firm needs to gather some funding or use its own savings, and it has to optimize the input of labor through the wage level and the input of the rate of capital. So when the Chancellor decides to increase the interest rate, so we can first of all explain what happens when we have an output gap. So when we have a positive output gap, the inflation tendentially tends to be higher, more or less. But in this case, we are having a shrinking GDP, and we are seeing higher inflation. So the choice of the Chancellor to increase the cost of hiring people is a tax on work. It poses a dilemma to the firm how to optimize their marginal cost in order to remain in business and to create jobs, to keep their employee, to pay wages, and to be profitable, to break even and to generate some return on the capital investment that they have made. So we know that the rate of wage equals 1 minus alpha, so the share of capital that is invested in the wage, the proportion of the output to the share of labor, and some exogenous shock. In this case, the Chancellor has been shocking our businesses. They've been shocking the muscle of our businesses. They are taxing on steroids our businesses, as there is Mr. Olympia tomorrow. But we need lean and productive business. We know that they have a cost of rental of capital. This is not a 4. It's not a 4. It's R at time t equals the share of capital allocated to the output of the firm in proportion of the capital deployed, invested in the firm, times some error term or shock, exogenous shock to the economy. Now, what happens is that when the Chancellor decides to increase the marginal costs of operating a business, we have a marginal cost base, which is this formula here on our left, but we see that it adds an additional cost, which is T tau, which is a new tax. We increase to 15%. So we are adding a marginal cost of 1.2% compared to the 13.8%. Okay, so the business has to make a pricing decision, which impacts, which basically goes into the pricing decision is a mathematical formula. Mr. Speaker, these are not words. These are not empty legislation. These are economic, empirical arguments and demonstration of how words are empty. What counts are numbers, because numbers describe the real world. Okay, we have this epsilon factor, which is the error factor, times the marginal costs at time t. So the firm has to implement a pricing decision when it's confronted with a hike in the cost of employing people. And that's on top of inflation expectation, but it fits through, it's a push cost effect on inflation expectation, because I'm expecting that paying taxes will be more expensive. Yeah, it's like expensive goods, Mr. Speaker. And so we are making paying taxes a luxury for our businesses. No wonder, Mr. Speaker, that then the Chancellor will find that she will receive less and less and less taxes, because it has become a luxury that only immoral monarchs for the Middle East can afford to pay to some American multinationals, so they avoid tax completely. Mr. Speaker, we cannot allow this to happen. So we have a pricing problem, how to price the output in proportion to the marginal cost and the rising cost of employing people. So when we employ people, we expand the aggregate supply of our businesses and in aggregate the aggregate supply of the economy. So when we impose a cost, then it's of course the supply of goods and services in the economy shrinks, and we have higher price, we have higher inflation, because we have more money chasing less goods. Okay, so the choice of the Chancellor, they are totally counterproductive for the prosperity and the ability of the businesses to thrive in our economy. So we know that for the equation that we had before, I will state it again. Inflation expectation, they are equal to beta time, inflation, beta time the expectation of future inflation, plus K, which is the stickiness of prices, plus 1 plus epsilon, which is the indexing of inflation, so past inflation effect, everything of alpha, and we have the output gap. The output gap is crucial, Mr. Speaker, in this time, so we expect higher future inflation here at time t plus 1 because of the additional cost, the increased cost on employing people. So we have a marginal cost which goes up, and we have this k parameter. Of course, we see that prices will remain sticky, so we have a stubborn inflation in the economy, stubborn cost. Nonetheless, today we see that inflation has increased to levels which are very difficult for the Bank of England, and so we see that when prices are high, firms are they find difficult to adjust. So there is a very slow process of adjusting, of taking the decision about the input in their businesses. And so what happens is that we have higher unemployment, and we have that crucially the output gaps are, Mr. Speaker, the output gap decreases, goes down. Okay, eventually we have a negative output gap, so it means that the real business cycle is turning downwards towards negative economic growth because the aggregate supply will decline. So the amount of goods and services that are produced shrinks and we have higher inflation at this point. So potentially we will find that the output gap will be negative, less than zero, and what means that the households, they will have to make choices. So the unfortunate people who have lost their jobs because of the tax on employment, they will have to make their choice about the choice of consumption or leisure, in proportion of the labor, time of labor, in proportion of the wage. But if the wage is zero, then we have a much worse problem, which is higher unemployment. So what happens is that we'll have marginal costs up, so prices up, Mr. Speaker, prices up. And we saw here in the data, Mr. Speaker, that we are having higher inflation in the past months due to the reckless economic and fiscal policy choices of this Labour government. We have a trend of higher inflation that started in October in the past year, and since then, from 2.3%, we have gone to 3.6%, and it keeps rising. So we have an inflationary cost in the economy, which makes firms, they are forced to choose between employing and non-employing people. Then what is that? The firms' behavior, they have to choose that labor demand, they will not hire any more workers. Labor demand goes down, so we have employment going down. Employment, Mr. Speaker, declining. And then we have pricing. So we have inflation. We have inflation higher because we have a cost push pass-through effect, because a tax on job is a cost that pass through the business, and the business pass through the cost to the ordinary consumer. And we hear stories, Mr. Speaker, that a pint of the Great British Ale, it has skyrocketed to prices at £6 or £8 per pint, which is something unconscionable for our people, our hardworking people. They need to be drunk by the end of business day at 5 p.m. They must be at the pub drinking like there is no tomorrow, because with this chancellor there is no tomorrow. There is only taxes on jobs. And the output gap, we say that it can become negative because more and more people, they will become fed up and produce less and less. And what happens is that the rising trend of inflation will make Mr. Speaker, will make inflation expectation at time t plus 1 go higher. So consumer expect that the 3.6 rate of inflation that we have this month at time t m plus 1, the next month, time t plus 1, will be higher. And so consumers, they will start to wonder why there is higher inflation, when the Chancellor has promised to go to the moon and back in 3 minutes and a half, and a magic wonder, and a Harry Potter magician, that we will travel to the moon and back in 3 minutes, which is completely false. And we see that inflation expectation will be higher. And so the problem that we have with rising inflation expectation are wages, because they will come back for more. Because wages at time t, we have expectations that wages at time t plus 1 will be higher. So we have a catch-up problem with the pint and the chips. We have a catch-up problem because we don't have enough. We are not producing enough mayo, Mr. Speaker, enough mayonnaise. We have to ask to our French friends to give us some mayonnaise from the beautiful France, because we have a catch-up problem. We will have a catch-up problem with higher inflation, with higher retail price index at 4.4%, and businesses, they will not be able anymore to afford any catch-up at the counter, and so they will demand higher wages, and that will become in its turn a cost push through effects on businesses. So a tax on jobs, it's completely a nonsense for the prosperity of our economy. And with this, I showed, Mr. Speaker, why we have higher inflation, and why we have a stagnating economy, and why we have a vicious circle of higher taxes, higher inflation, low aggregate supply, so shrinking GDP, and we are plunging our country in a vicious doom loop of stagnation and rising unemployment with rising inflation, and the Chancellor hasn't got a clue on how to deal with this. And we are telling people to consume instead of think carefully how to utilize their money and improve their marginal utility, because we know that if I buy a sandwich, what is the marginal utility of the next sandwich on which I'm going to gorge upon? It's less, okay? So consuming does make people happy. Mr. Speaker.